Lauren, thank you for that beautiful music this morning. We are grateful for that. And I hope all of you are having a good summer. Summer's winding down, and it's good to see you here this morning. Please join me in prayer as we begin. Loving God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. You are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So a little humor to begin this morning. A man went to see his rabbi, and he stated in a very serious tone, "Rabbi, something terrible is happening, and I have to talk to you about it." And the rabbi said, "Well, what's wrong?" The man replied, "My wife is trying to poison me, I think." And the rabbi was very surprised, and he said, "Well, how could this be?" And the man then pleaded, "I'm telling you, I'm certain that she's trying to poison me." The rabbi said, "Well, I'll tell you what, let me talk to her, and I'll see what I can find out, and I'll get back to you, and I'll let you know what I think." A week later, the rabbi called the man back and said, "Well, I spoke to your wife. In fact, I spoke to her on the phone for 3 hours. Do you want my advice?" And the man anxiously replied, "Why, yes." And the rabbi said, "Take the poison." During a wedding rehearsal, a groom approached a pastor with a very unusual offer, and he said, "I'll give you $100 if you'll change the wedding vows, and when you get to the part where I'm supposed to promise to love and honor and obey and be faithful to her forever, I'd appreciate it if you just leave that out." And he passes the minister a $100 bill, and he walks away feeling very satisfied. Well, on the day of the wedding, the minister gets to the point where it's time for the vows, and the pastor looks at the groom, and he says, "Will you promise to revere her, to obey her every command and wish, to serve her breakfast in bed every morning, and do you swear eternally before God and your lovely wife that you will never even think about looking at another woman, as long as you both shall live?" And the man gulped and said in a tiny voice, "I do." And then he leans towards the pastor and he says, "I thought we had a deal." And the pastor puts a $100 bill in his hand and he said, "We did, but she made me a better offer." Today we're continuing our summer series on powerful words from the Apostle Paul. We started this back in June, and we're going to go for a few more weeks. But we're going to talk about a topic this morning that we can all relate to on some level, and that is the topic of family. Family and family dynamics. I just got back from vacation Friday night. Every year we go with Megan's family to the Outer Banks in Duck, North Carolina for a week. And let me tell you that a week in a beach house with your in-laws and your cousins will give you a lot of time to think about family and family dynamics. But we had a great week, and it's good to be back. Many of you know my story. I moved here 7 years ago to take this job here at Woodmont. I was single. I was 27. I'll turn 34 tomorrow. I moved here with a golden retriever and a U-Haul that had all of my earthly possessions. And now I find myself 7 years later, married with 2 kids, a completely redecorated house. I eat fewer meals at the corner pub than I did when I moved here, which means none. So my life has changed a lot. But I want to begin the sermon this morning by making 5 observations just about families in general. 5 things that I want to put out there. The first is none of us, and I mean none of us, get to choose our family of origin. We are born into it, and that may or may not be a good thing, but we don't get to choose the family into which we are born. The second thing is there's no such thing as a normal family. That is an oxymoron. It does not exist. Every family has problems. Every family has tension. Every family has issues. Every family is not perfect. So let's just get it out there that we all have that in common this morning. Third, every single one of us, if we're honest, thinks that we are the smartest people in our families. And if everybody else would just listen to us and listen to what we have to say and what we want and what we think should happen, then our family would run smooth and everybody would get along and life would be much simpler and much less complicated. Fourth, Family is one of the greatest blessings that God has given to us. It's also one of the most challenging aspects of our lives. Some of our greatest joys and fulfillment in life comes from family, and some of our greatest disappointments and stresses in life come from family. That's just the way it is. And then fifth, when we read the scriptures, we find that we are called to love our family. Honor your father and mother. Wives, love your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. Children, obey your parents. Parents, don't provoke your children to anger. Time and time again, the scriptures talk about the importance of loving and respecting and honoring our family. Our text from Ephesians this morning that Tom read is one of those texts where people take issue with the Apostle Paul. He's talking about the Christian household, and he says, be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, be subject to your husbands as you are to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, just as Christ is head of the church. Now, we could end the sermon right there and just say a prayer and go home, but I know better than that, even though my wife's not here this morning. Paul continues. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. And a few verses later, husbands should love their wives as they do their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. We need to understand the context into which Paul was writing these words. The first century was a patriarchal society. Men dominated. Women did not have very much status in that culture. They were viewed as property. On top of that, it was very easy for a husband to divorce his wife for just about any reason that he would come up with. All he needed was a rabbi and 2 witnesses, and he could divorce his wife and be done with it just like that. So marriage in that culture was not taken very seriously, and you could get out of it very easily if you wanted to. So the irony here is that Paul, who is taking his cue from Jesus, is advocating for marriage in an age where women were property, they were looked at as objects, and divorce happened frequently for little or no reason. And yet, many people forget that Paul actually did a lot to advance the role and status of women because they get so hung up on that word submit. In an egalitarian society, we don't like that word. But the truth is, wives should submit to their husbands, and husbands should submit to their wives. It should happen both ways. In fact, that's really the only way that marriage can work. You see, when you're getting married, you are committing to another person, and in everything you say and everything you do, you should think about that other person. And we now live in 2014 where the role of women has certainly evolved, and that's a good thing. In fact, I'll just be really honest this morning. I don't understand churches that still won't let women be in leadership. I don't understand it. We live in a different time now. Women are not property. Women are to be respected and treasured and treated fairly. Marriage is a two-way street. Many of you have heard of Andy Stanley. He's a very dynamic pastor in Atlanta, and every minister has other ministers that we like to listen to or watch to get ideas and to see what they're doing. But Andy Stanley has preached many sermons in his career on marriage and family because he knows how important this subject is in the church and also just for the health and well-being of any society. But Andy makes an interesting point. He talks about how falling in love is easy. All it really takes is a pulse, he says. We all have the ability to fall in love, and often we do it for the wrong reasons, and we do it far too quickly. But staying in love, he says, is the challenge. He says that when we meet somebody and we start dating and we get serious and then we get engaged, we have a big box of desires, a box of dreams, wishes, things that we bring into the relationship and into the marriage with us. Ideas about the way that life is supposed to be, the way that life is going to be. We desire to be treated in a certain way. We desire to live in a certain type of house and drive a certain type of car. We desire to have a certain number of kids and to send them to certain schools. We desire to do certain chores or not do certain chores around the house. We desire a certain schedule in our marriage, and we think that we should have a certain amount of time for ourselves. We desire to be loved and admired and respected and supported and a host of other things. And we have this perfect picture of how life is going to be in the future once we are married and once we have a family. And so when we get married and we march down the aisle and we say our vows for better or worse, for richer or poor, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part, Stanley says that we immediately take all of these desires and we turn them into expectations. And then if things don't happen the way that we expect them to happen, the way that we had hoped that they would happen, then we get very disappointed and very disillusioned very quickly. And what Andy Stanley says is that the problem in most marriages, and I would also add the problem in most families, is the focus on I. I want this, I want that, I want things to be this way, cater to my wants and my needs. And if you end up with two people that are always focused on I, or if you end up with a family that's always focused on I, then you're going to have problems. Because marriage and family life is a team sport. It has to be. It doesn't work if one person is always giving and the other person is always taking. I've always said the marriage is a huge step in the direction of unselfishness, and then having kids is a giant leap in the direction of unselfishness. And marriages and families where the focus is always on I and me tend to have a lot of problems. Now let's talk about family. What is the difference between healthy family dynamics and unhealthy family dynamics? What's the difference between a family where all the members feel loved and appreciated and supported and a family where there's tension and rivalry and jealousy and resentment, where the members want nothing to do with each other? Now, obviously, the events of life have a lot to do with this. But to get specific this morning, I think that having a healthy family life boils down to four basic things. And I don't claim to have mastered these, by the way, but I can talk about them. The first is obvious, and it's unselfishness. Family life is a process of giving and taking, but those who are always taking and never giving can be labeled as selfish. If you're part of a family, you have to be just as concerned about the feelings and the well-being of the other family members as you are about your own. Which means you have to go out of your way to be there, to help, to check on the other family members, just like you're there to think about yourself. Paul says, you love your spouse the same way that you love your own body. Now, for those of us that are a little bit chubby, that doesn't bode well for our spouses, right? But what he's saying is that we have to love our family members the same way that we care about ourselves. You can't just turn to your family only when you need something. When Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, that also meant love your family members. Check on them, call them, visit them, invite them over. Be intentional about spending time with them and letting them know that you care about them. You know, so many times we're good at being kind to our friends and to strangers and to work colleagues and to neighbors, but we're not very good at appreciating and building up the people that deserve our best. And that's not right. Don't be selfish when it comes to your family. Don't take them for granted. I've done many funerals in this very church and other places. And it's always amazing to me when somebody passes away, how many times people will say, if only I had said this to them. If only I'd let them know how I feel. If only I had done this or that. If only I hadn't left this undone. Don't leave anything undone because you never know what tomorrow might bring. Don't put off reconciling a relationship within your family. It's often true that we spend more quality time with family members who live out of town because we take for granted and we think that, oh, of course we're going to get to see the people that are in town. But don't do that. I think it's good for families to have one night a week or one day a week that is a standing date where they get together for dinner or they get together for breakfast on a Saturday, and they can count on that time to be together and to just be in each other's presence and company and to talk about what's going on in their lives. Don't be selfish when it comes to spending time and doing something for your family, because there are lots of people who wish they had a family to do something with. Second key to healthy family dynamic, I think, is forgiveness. We're called to forgive as Christians, and that applies to our family members as well. But for some reason, we are inclined to forgive our friends and other people, but we're very slow to forgive our family members. Well, why is that? Well, I think it's because we hold our family members to a much higher standard. And so when they do something to hurt us or to betray us, we have a much more difficult time with that, but still, Christ calls us to forgive. Families cannot exist without forgiveness, because if we hold on to everything that has been done to us and we don't let it go, then a healthy relationship is not possible with that person. And part of the reason that we're slow to do this is because oftentimes we're waiting on another person to come and say, I'm sorry. And we think that if we say, I'm sorry first, then we're admitting that we did something wrong. But guess what? Many years and memories are missed out on because somebody is waiting for somebody else to apologize first. But if you would just get over it and take the high road, then things could be so much better. So ask for forgiveness even if you don't think that you did anything wrong, and grant forgiveness if somebody else has hurt you in the past. Life is too short to go along and to hold on to grudges and to resentments from the past. It's just too short. Now, of course, our pride and our egos always get in the way of this, and that's something that we have to deal with. The third ingredient to healthy family dynamic is loyalty. We're called to be loyal to our families. It starts with our spouse, but it doesn't stop there. No matter what happens in life, we should remain loyal to our families. We are united by blood, and loyalty does not stop when something goes wrong. Families need each other the most when something goes wrong, when a divorce happens, when an illness arises, when a job is lost. These are the times in life when we need family, and yet sometimes because of the pain that is involved, we have a hard time staying loyal. Family members will say things like, I just need my distance right now. But it's during the difficult times of life that family members need to be there for each other. We need to know that our family members are not going to turn on us when things go wrong. It doesn't mean that we have to condone or approve everything that our other family members do, but we do need to remain loyal. And this is really put to the test in situations, I think, of divorce and addiction and infidelity and dishonesty. That's when it's put to the test. Lastly, this morning, the fourth and final characteristic of healthy family dynamics is unconditional love. Now, how do we know what that is? I think we take Paul's definition in 1 Corinthians 13. When it comes to our families, are we patient? Are we kind? Are we envious, boastful, arrogant, or rude? Do we always insist on our own way? Are we irritable or resentful? Do we rejoice when things go wrong? Do we tell the truth in love? Unconditional love, according to Paul, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. And Paul says that unconditional love never ends. Now, I'm fully aware that there are situations in life where family members have had to part ways or cut off ties for whatever reason. And this happens. But although this happens, it should be very rare. What troubles me is that families often take each other for granted, and it's not until somebody passes away that we realize what we had and what we've lost. Family life is complicated. It's not easy. It has its frustrations and its setbacks. But I promise you that marriage and family life is one of God's greatest gifts in this world. So let's acknowledge that and let's be thankful for that. And let's not take it for granted. And for those who are here this morning who may not have any family or who have lost a spouse or the rest of your family, that's why we have the church family. And I think the same 4 things apply when it comes to building a healthy church family. So let me end this morning with a challenge for you that I hope you'll take to heart. If you have a family relationship that is strained and that needs to be healed, I challenge you this week to reach out to try to heal it. If you haven't taken the time to tell a family member how much they mean to you, I challenge you this week to do that. And if you have neglected getting your family together for a dinner or a trip, then I challenge you to do it. Get it on the schedule, get it on the calendar. We don't ever want to leave things left